Good evening and welcome, everybody. I'm Luis Jaramillo, the Director of Creative Writing here at the New School. Thanks so much for joining us with Canem and Poets on Craft. This is one of my favorite events that Canem does. I think mainly because craft can often seem like such a clinical word, like all it refers to is, language and form. But these conversations, craft is much more expansive. It's about the writer, in a body, it's about a writer in the world. And so craft becomes a much richer conversation. So I will sit down now because I'm so excited to hear from all these writers and hear their poetry and what they have to say. Please join me in welcoming to the mic Elizabeth Bryant, Programs Coordinator for Canem.
Hello and welcome. Can you hear me? I can speak more into this. My name is Elizabeth Bryant. I am the Programs and Communications Coordinator at Canem Foundation. If you don't know, Canem was founded in 1996 to remedy the underrepresentation and isolation of African American poets in the American literary landscape. Since the organization has grown into an international home for the many voices of Black poetry, annually serving a direct audience, you all, of over 4,000 through programs such as these, where dialogue serves to enlarge the literary canon. I invite you all to stay in the loop, to sign up for our mailing list, which is in the back, to visit our website, cavecanonpoets.org, and to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at cavecanonpoets, where we post updates about prize deadlines, workshops, events, and so much more. Also, if you happen to be in Miami next week, lucky you, you may join us on April 4th for the launch of the 2017 Toy Derricott and Cornelius Eady chapbook prize-winning manuscript titled God Suspected My Heart Was a Geode, But He Had to Make Sure by Layla Benitez James. We'll be back here at the New School on April 10th for a new works reading featuring the extraordinary poets Aaron Coleman, Shane McCrae, and Camille Dungy. I would like to express so much warmth and gratitude to the New School's MFA in Creative Writing program, with special thanks to Luis Jaramillo and Lori Lynn Turner. Thanks are due to our funders, the Lannan Foundation, the Whiting Foundation, Amazon Literary Partnerships, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts. Thank you also to Canem's amazing Programs and Communications Fellow, Natalie DeRosier, who is absolutely vital to the work that we do behind the scenes at Canem and will be selling books by this evening's presenters in the back. Of course, special thanks to all of you, our beautiful audience members. Now, on behalf of Canem's Board of Directors and Executive Director Nicole Seeley, it is my pleasure to introduce this evening's poets, who will both read their own work before engaging a moderated conversation on craft. U.S. Poet Laureate and Canem Fellow Tracy K. Smith describes Cyrus Cassell's most recent collection, The Gospel According to Wild Indigo, which is on sale this evening, as an ecstasy, a God's eye view of place, time, and the vivid revelations of flesh and spirit. In an interview with Huffington Post, Cassells explains how the book's title sequence is an extended paean to the integrity and enduring strength of the Gullah culture of Charleston and the Sea Islands. He goes on to say that these poems celebrate the legacy of resilient rice and indigo working slaves and their irrepressible descendants. Cassells is also the author of The Mud Actor, winner of the 1981 National Poetry Series competition, Soul Make a Path Through Shouting, winner of the William Carlos Williams Award, Beautiful Signor, winner of the Lambda Literary Award, More Than Peace and Cypresses, and the Crossed-Out Swastika. He has held fellowships at the National Endowment for the Arts and the Rockefeller Foundation, and has received the Lannan Literary Award, the Peter I.B. Lavan Younger Poet Award, and 2 Pushcart Prizes. Cassells, who also works as a translator, film critic, and actor, teaches at the MFA program at Texas State University, San Marcos. Though frequently found working and traveling abroad, he lives in Austin. In a recent interview for PEN America, Kyla Marshall described Khadijah Queen's work as possessing something not just tongue and cheek, but as having the unmistakable presence of side-eye, a smirking knowledge parsed out to her readers bit by bit. This may be due in part to Queen's dedication to ever deepening both knowledge and intuition. She asserts how our intuition is powerful and that the truth in fiction taps into that intuition, helping us to further trust it. Queen is the author of 5 books of poetry and hybrid prose. Most recently, I'm So Fine, a list of famous men and what I had on, which is for sale this evening. Her verse play, Non Sequitur, won the Leslie Scalapino Award for Innovative Women's Performance in Writing, which also included a full stage production at Theater Lab in New York City. Queen's individual poems and prose appear in Fence, Tin House, BuzzFeed, The Offing, Memoir, Diagram, and widely elsewhere. She serves as core faculty in poetry and playwriting for the low residency Mile High MFA in creative writing at Regis University and is visiting scholar in creative writing at University of Colorado in Boulder. This evening's moderator has been described by Brooklyn Magazine's editor-in-chief Yadon Israel as swaggy, poetic, super fly, and super generous, coming through with a high top fade. Jason P. Smith, among many things, describes himself as a student always. Born and raised in the Bronx, Smith is a 2017 Niska NYFA Artist Fellow in Poetry. Their work appears in publications such as West Branch, 92Y, Gulf Coast, Neplanta, Vinyl, Fields Magazine, and The Offing. Jason has received previous support from the Poetry Project, the Conversation Literary Festival, Callaloo, and Malay Colony for the Arts, and currently lives and works in Brooklyn as founder of Nomad Reading Series and a Spark House teaching artist. Please join me in welcoming Cyrus Cassells.
Can everyone hear me? Well, thank you. I'm especially thrilled this is the very first reading from the new book, which just came out a few weeks ago. Thank you. I started these poems when I was faculty at Canem, maybe like 12 years ago. I'm going to read, it's a sequence of poems about Gullah culture, but I'm going to read the slave voices mostly from that sequence. The first one is called Caesars and Dreamers. The pharaohs of rice and indigo, the conniving Caesars of cotton. What were we to them? Profitable, able bodies from Barbados and the Windward Coast, the Rice Coast. Our souls ramshackle, less than a rooster's or a rock's. And yet in painstaking fields and joyous praise houses, our tenacious go down Moses, our stirring, rallying, in the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea, might have served as proof to those southern despots that we possess some quilt scrap of God. Go tell those greed-swayed kings of sugar, those implacable princes of tobacco, how we garnered freedom in our hard-scrabbled dreams, sang it as sweat-drenched, unshakable hallelujah, whispered it as healing salve to allay the defiling stripes on our backs. Unstinting overseer, iron-eyed Caesar, who better to define freedom than a slave? Wild Indigo, because when rice was our nemesis and callus making cotton and the onus of a Satan-hot tobacco seemed to stain our very souls, beyond the spirit-choking pest house of Sullivan's Island, our Ellis Island, beyond the dust and ragtag squalor of Slave Row, we found a dew-soaked purplish blue in the needed time. Imagine in a siren patch behind the blacksmiths, a God-sent and doe wild blue. The epigraph for this sequence, the Gospel according to Wild Indigo, is from all people Wallace Stevens. The pine tree sweetens my body. The wild iris beautifies me. So I made a poem out of each of those two lines. This is the second line. The white iris beautifies me. Not the white of hard-won cotton or of pitiless snow. I've found a whiteness that gives me its glory. It blooms in Master Belmare's garden, and though it is, by all accounts, untouchable, quiet as it's kept, I've carried it into the shabbiest of cabins, worn it as I witnessed the slave breaker, the hanging tree. In dream snatches, it blesses me, and I become more than a brand, a pretty chess piece. At the mistress's bell, always prudent and afraid, wily and afraid. And when the day comes, my rescuing flower's name will become my daughter's. A freeborn woman, I swear, she will never be shoeless in January snow. Bold Iris, she will never fear sail or the bottom of the sea. This one is, if you're familiar with Song of Solomon, with the flying African people whirling around and flying back to Africa. This one's called Moonhuggers. It's a variation of that myth. Moonhuggers. Amid cabin whispers of breakneck renegades, invisible maroons, wind-ferried Africans, cornered and chained, we let magic become our ammunition. From witnessing Carolina pines, abetting bobwhites, reminded us in forest code of the incantation tucked, fail-safe behind our misery, that at some unmanning moment we might rally and soar from the tethering plantation in one moon-hugging, star-scouting soul of a nighthawk leap, past sundering marketplaces, bought and sold and bought and sold and bought and sold, gliding east, moon, 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 with an unpredicted glee. This is a poem where the indigo speaks. The indigo flowers speak themselves to the descendants of slaves. It's called A Siren Patch of Indigo. And it's inspired by a work by Romare Bearden. A siren patch of indigo. Listen, though we swell as rampant woodland or riverbank blossoms in your tensile world, as commonplace beauty and reachable remedy, as soothing eyewash for the Osage, hardy dye for the Cherokee. Quiet as it's kept, we're more akin to clearing and hillside wayshowers, offhand griots quietly reminding you the punishing rose, the grim night world of the Middle Passage, was never your true province. Even in appalling chains, the light of your integrity, your inmost wonder, still encircled you, resolute and violent. Always recall, dear progeny of Sea Island slaves, in galling dearth or in Juneteenth glory, our deep annealing sacramental blue belongs to you. I'll just read a couple more from that sequence. This is the other line from Wallace Stevens. The pine tree sweetens my body. As pine needles coalesce with bulrush and sweetgrass to shore a cherished sea island basket, so it seems the fortifying, peace-granting pines have been nonchalantly woven into my days. Out of childhood and enmeshing memory, they appear, co-dreamers, immobile shepherds, surely. From a precocious roving boys avid to learn vantage, not as supreme as a giraffe, oh no, but just as heaven-reaching. For the inveterate pines, perhaps, the crab-ruled low country marshes have always been arresting theaters. Whatever was shouted or gasped at Jubilee, at the silver point of the bridegroom's climax, or the baby's crowning, they ably cached in their commanding branches, so that if I lay my hardy boy ear to the telltale bark, as I did the tobacco-scented summer I was 9, some long-dead singing from vanished dooryards, from cabins and heart-stopping fields, supper-getting-ready songs hummed in pie-cooking heat is still ensconced in the pine. This board just lit up there, so just wondering. Just a couple more from this sequence. This sequence actually has characters. There's a speaker. The speaker is in love with a man named Augustus, or A. But A's father, who's a World War II veteran, is also an important character in the sequence. And this is about a special incident during the war in his life. It's called Itzhak's Mighty Oak. As I was leaving Dachau, that wild, raw negative of Eden, a boy, thin as a wishbone, scurried into my tank's path. I halted, opened the hatch, and climbed out. Clasping ragamuffin arms around my regulation trousers, he raised a tattered banner of English. America, Mickey Mouse, Mickey Mouse. I picked him up, unmoored. He might have been mine, or even your endangered son. He marveled at my generous lips, my nappy hair, and Itzhak made it bell clear through his settered-eyed looks he'd never seen a Negro. And in the proudest moment of my life, I laughed and whistled, content to be Itzhak's mighty oak, his at-the-ready night, and his deliverance. And the title poem of the sequence, the last poem in the sequence, The Gospel According to Wild Indigo. In time, the sea-loved Carolinas, the spade and hoe land, which was our brick soul, yoke and lament, became, so help us, our land. On Ladies Island, Cat Island, Dafuski, St. Helena, Ham's unlauded children, broken and unbroken, we waded in the mothering water, garnering the Moses-wise Marcia's secrets, the irrepressible crab's broadcasts. Under the dipper dreamers, singers, we let ancient oaks counsel us, mossy Abrahams and Isaacs. From pliant sweetgrass we coaxed mint new forms of utility and beauty. We learned resilience. Who better to define freedom than a slave? A taproot waiting from the gospel according to Wild Indigo, in which death and defiling bondage are transformed into foam and fish-scale blue, a heron swoop, and bold-fisted hurricanes dismantle the master's belligerence. Our prophet-smashing owners, our slyly disowning fathers, they told us we had no rights to the dawn and gave us first instead the Gorgon's heart of the hold, thick as black-strapped syrup. But here it comes. Can we get a witness? Here it comes with a renegade swiftness. Yo-ho, yo-ho, night-yoked mother, never defeated brother, sister, inspiriting down to the wire, immaculate as a deacon's gloves, day clean. Just a Gullah word for sunrise. One more poem. I'm going to end with the final poem of the book, which is an elegy to my mother. And then I'll hand it over to Khadijah. It's called Elegy with a Gold Cradle. Now that you're forever ministering wind in turquoise, ashes eclipsed by the sea's thrust and the farthest tour, I know you are always more than my mother. Giveaway flecks tipped and scattered from an island palisade. Now that you are restless synonym for the whistling fisherman's surfacing mesh, the alluring moon's path in progress, through a vast chaos of unrelenting waves, let me reveal, in the Adelos days following your scattering, in my panoramic hotel, I found a sun-flooded cradle, so pristine, so spotlit, and sacramental, beside my harbor-facing bed. I couldn't bear to rock or even touch it, Mother. I marveled at the gold leaf bars and contours, the antique wood beneath, an emblem of unbeatable hope and prevailing tenderness. Then, for a crest-like hallowing hour, listen, my morning was suffused with the specter of your late calm cascade of hair, inkwell dark in the accruing shadows, your rescuing, soothing contralto. And oh yes, Isabel, the longed-for fluttering of my nap-time lids, entrancing gold of the first revealing dawns, the first indispensable lullabies.
Woo! How y'all doing? All right. Thank you, Canem. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Elizabeth and Natalie and Jason, and of course, Cyrus and Nunu School. I'm just gonna read some poems. I grew up, I don't know, they're like kind of poems, but they're also like poem adjacent. So we were trying to figure out what to call it, and the publisher wanted it to be a memoir, but I was like, I can't do that. So we came up with a narrative, so sort of in between spaces. And I grew up in Los Angeles. That's probably all the stuff you need to know. I met Marcus Chong on the 105 bus, method acting. I was going home in a flowered dress after work. I worked at Fatburger. I was 18, and I think he was twice that. I had my uniform in my backpack with my statistics homework and Woman Warrior. I recognized him and said I liked Panther. This was way before The Matrix. He asked me for my number. We talked on the phone. He came to visit me on his bike since he didn't live far from my job and ordered a veggie burger. I had a lemonade on my 15-minute break in my black Fatburger outfit and ugly food service shoes. He asked me on a date. I said yes. He called with a plan. I said I thought we were going somewhere, but he wanted to make me dinner at his house. I said, no, I don't know you well enough to go to your house. He got angry at the end. I met Cuba Gooding Jr. at the Beverly Center food court. I was 16, Boys in the Hood had just come out, and my best friend Tiffany dared me to ask if I could hug him. He said I was beautiful and seemed really happy to get that hug, but I brown blushed nervously, and he sat a few booths away with his friend and veggie slices from Sparrow and smiled a lot. I wore a Tiff skin-tight cloth bomber jacket and red lipstick. I had perfect skin and didn't drink carbonated beverages. The Beverly Center food court is also where I met Devontae's brother from Jodeci. I forgot his name, but we didn't really meet. He was just looking at my eyes and then looking at my ass as I kept walking. I really liked red lipstick back then. I got it that day with my saved allowance at Rexall across the street, a blue, red, and a gold case, and we both had on white jeans. I was 17, and I remember it was summer. Dave Chappelle also looked at my ass, and he also said, damn! We were in the frozen food section at Ralph's in North Hollywood, and I half smiled. I was wearing my favorite old Levi's with the whole left side belt loop and had just moved back to LA with my 2-year-old. Chris Rock did the same thing, same jeans at the movie theater across from the Beverly Center, and he thought he wouldn't be recognized with that newsboy cap on, but I saw him, he looked twice. DJ Quick was really nice. I was in his video because I did modeling and movie and TV extra work to pay for school. He didn't say or do anything disrespectful, and I appreciated that. I had on a striped dress, fitted and long with a slit on the side. I was 19 and needed a ride home. I let my sister use the car, and the shoot ended early, so the director let me use his cell, one of those big-ass Motorola flips, but no one was answering at home, so I had to call this Nigerian guy that I just met the day before. He kind of creeped me out, but the set was at the straight hood, and it was getting dark, so I called him for a ride. He came zooming up the street 15 minutes later in a red BMW and wanted to hang out, but I really, really didn't. We were going to the Century Club later, me and my girls, so I just said we would meet him there, but I really wasn't going to meet him. He could just find us if he could, and if he didn't, oh well. And we went. It was fun at first. My sister's friend had double Ds and never wore underwear, so we got in free everywhere. And we saw a bunch of Lakers, and then she had to go and get drunk. We had to save her from this boxer dude who was trying to take her home. She didn't know what the F she was doing, so I stayed with her while our younger sisters went to get the car. Then the guy grabbed her by the arm. I could see it turning red. I wouldn't let go of her hand. I called for help. No one came. My shoe fell off. Where the fuck are they with the goddamn car, I thought, and called for help. Again, louder, over and over, and finally, a bouncer came and told the guy to leave, and the boxer guy looked at me and acted like he was going to walk off, then turned around and lunged. And I thought he was going to punch me in the face, but I didn't move. I didn't flinch because fuck him. But thank God the bouncer held him back, even though he rolled his eyes at us once the boxer finally left and mumbled something about stupid bitches. Let's see. My mom, this is for Cyrus. My mom has never been very starstruck, but she loved her some Billy D. My sister and I love Star Wars, and when she saw Billy D. Williams smiling at her from a 3x5 trading card we got from the Circle K, she went a little nuts, hollering and snatching at who we thought of as Lando Calrissian. She shouted, "Whoa! Oh!" and snatched it and smiled and said, "May I have that one to put in my wallet, please?" My mother has a gorgeous smile, and I like Lando too, but not that much. So I said sure and giggled. It must have been 4 or 5 when Star Wars came out, and probably had on a Kmart short set. And when she ran into him at the Whole Foods in Studio City in 2004, she said to herself, "Oh my God, my hair is not right. My clothes are not right. My shoes are not right," and hid behind a pyramid of assorted vitamins. Let's see what else is in here. When I met LL Cool J, I had just quit Fatburger. It was a Saturday morning, and without knowing how I would afford to pay for it, I drove my new used powder blue 1988 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme with my sister to Sam Goody's off Washington Boulevard, and we met our friend / ex-coworker Squeak, aka Slim. She wore rimless glasses and was 6 feet tall, and nicknamed by the same ex-coworker who nicknamed me Twin 1 and my younger sister Twin 2 because she couldn't pronounce our names. But our boss Lena could. She called our names all damn day. She had a slight goatee and crooked glasses and a limp. She was mean. And because she said we thought we were cute, she loved making us do the dirtiest work like clean the toilets and under the grill, especially when the general manager changed our title to customer service rep. And we were supposed to engage with the guests and not deal with food. And one day she spilled something on the floor and told me to mop it up right now. This was after she accused me of stealing $20 from the register. So I was already mad. And Mike the grill guy said she found it under the counter the next morning. So I looked her right in the sweaty face and said, "You cleaned it up," and dropped the mop like a microphone and walked out to applause. Anyway, fast forward, the 3 of us stood together in line to buy LL's new CD talking shit about Lena's missing side teeth. I had on black slacks and black aerosol sandals and a cheap, silky polyester Rampage button down and wallet in a tiny pleather backpack. I'm sure I looked a hot, poor mess, but oh well. We got to see LL lick them lips and smile and sign our posters and CDs. I sent the poster to my niece in Michigan, and the CD wasn't all that good, but I did like that one song with Boyz II Men. We bumped that in the Oldsmo, and I still miss that car's hellified bass. Montel Jordan came to the drive-thru as I was clocking out the day before I quit. So I went outside to get his autograph for one of my nieces who thought he was so fine. He was in a black Suburban with 5011 dudes and was really cool about it and didn't try to hit on me. I probably smelled like fat fries, even though I changed out of my uniform in empty khaki shorts. He turned the music way down to hear me better and seemed really tired. I knew that feeling. I still had to take 2 buses home and get up at 5:30 the next morning to make it to 8 a.m. statistics class in Santa Monica and try not to get flashed like earlier that day by a barefoot homeless man in a filthy cloth diaper thing. I was too tired to be anything but mad that I had to stop studying and leave my seat on the bus bench as he swung his pale penis around like a stripper tassel. I screamed, "Get the hell out of my face!" And he sagged like an empty burlap sack and walked away, revealing the thong quality of the diaper, which made me throw up in my mouth a little bit. And a cop strolled out of the nearby Winchell, sipping a large cup of coffee, and asked if I was all right. He said, "Do you want me to arrest him?" I said, "No, I just want to keep reading The Salt Eaters." I never met Snoop Dogg, but I met his homie Lil Half Dead. It was a video shoot for Half Dead that I don't think ever came out. Another extra assignment my sister and I were both chosen for and paid a premium on top of the non-union rate, but it was not enough for what we had to go through. The dozen of us girls there had no dressing room, so we packed the tiny ladies' room 4 at a time to change into wardrobe as Half Dead's degenerate entourage kept knocking on the door and trying to peek underneath and making lewd comments. Half Dead himself flashed Castax at me and got mad when I refused his proposal to kick it later. All of a sudden, I was a stuck-up bitch, and then it was time to start the shoot. We got called to set, and the smoke machine was going on the faux dance floor, and midway through the unremarkable song, one of the goons tried to pull my sister's dress down in the front, his finger actually touching her chest. The AD had no control, and Half Dead, who looked half dead, it was like his whole aura was dirty. He got on this bitch tirade again until one of the girls started grinding on him and pulling her skirt up, revealing a thong, and the entourage went crazy throwing dollars at her. And my sister and I put on our sneakers with our dresses and got our stuff and our signed vouchers because they damn sure were going to pay us regardless because that shit was over the fucking top and we couldn't get out of there fast enough. We started hearing threats. When I worked in retail, actually at Circuit City, we left that out, but it was Circuit City. Y'all remember Circuit City? When I worked at Circuit City, my coworker said Suge Knight liked her hairy legs. And I don't know how true it was, but she said he bought the gold chain she wore every day. And this was the year Tupac died, and I drove my Oldsmobile with the lights on in the daytime. She and I were both 19 and had to wear skirts, suits, or slacks in our department. We sold CD players and handheld recorders and tried to get people to buy warranties, and she could talk those customers into buying almost anything. And she tried to help me think beyond thrifting and wet seals. She tried to tell me about Gerbeau jeans and Gucci bags, and she really loved her small Chanel. I don't remember her name, but I remember a dude who worked in the AV department who kept trying to add me on LinkedIn 20 years after the fact. Like, for real, nope. And I won't say if my coworker got hurt, but she made a fact out of fear. And once I remember makeup over bruises, the 1990s dangerous for women like any other decade like now. And the main thing about the guy trying to add me on LinkedIn is how close he stood to me whenever I wore my mother's baby blue V-neck button down because he was trying to look down the front. I never met Donald Trump, but I sure have been grabbed by the you-know-what. And I really don't even want his name in my book, and I almost didn't tell this story, but sometimes it's important to name names, and the luxury of fame is that it doesn't matter what a nobody says. If you have enough money, you can buy any kind of truth you want. When you're a star, they let you do it. And actually, when you're a man in general, the one who did that to me wasn't anyone famous. It was a homeless man on the La Brea bus. I was 15 and had on a white t-shirt and denim skirt. I was with my mother, and she tried to protect me, but he chased me from the front of the bus to the back. And the driver, who happened to be really tall and muscular with his uniform sleeves rolled up past his biceps and sunglasses on with a strap, he had to stop the bus at Rodeo by the old movie theater and push the homeless guy down the exit stairs. And even on the street, he kept banging on the flimsy doors and sticking out his tongue and shouting. All right, 2 more. Y'all want to hear Tupac or Prince? All right, let's see. The Rock. The Tupac was really long. When we met Tupac, we had just left the arena on Sunset because it was gay night and we couldn't get in. We were 5 of us crammed into Kelly's red hatchback just about to get some Taco Bell and go home when we saw him in a black Mercedes, equally crammed, and we screamed and yelled, "We love you!" And he and his friends invited us to a hotel party, which seemed sketchy to me. But it was Tupac, and it was Kelly's car, and she wanted to go, so we went. It was not far away, also on Sunset. By the time we got a parking space, a bunch of girls were already there talking to him. He was surrounded and shorter than all of them. His head looked like it was bigger than his body, but he had really white, perfect teeth and a leather vest with no shirt and all those hot tattoos. We asked one of the bodyguards where the bathroom was so we could freshen up, and of course we all had to go together. And Kelly started talking about how much she wanted to get at Tupac. She was from Louisiana and lived in a house in the Hollywood Hills, the richest of us, which was easy actually, because we were mostly poor and lived in apartments. But she said she wanted to go to his room and have sex with him and say he raped her. Can you believe that shit? She wanted the money. And we all laughed at first, but this chick was serious. We told her we weren't going for it. She said, whatever, I'm cuter than all y'all, and I drove. I'm going to do whatever the fuck I want. She unbuttoned her top down to the lace of her white bra and walked out of the bathroom. I had on one of my least favorite outfits because it was time to do the laundry. I might be blacking it from memory, but I think it was brown or olive green or something yuck. And the four of us debated what to do about Kelly. So I decided to call my dad for a ride home, came out of the bathroom and asked where the payphone was. Back then we all had pagers, but no cell. And one of the bodyguards was blocking another girl from entering the lobby. She was at least 6 feet tall and barely dressed, but super young in the face. He asked her for ID. It was middle school ID. She was only 13. He told her, go home right now, little girl, where are your parents? We were in shock, but glad he seemed decent. We felt like we had to tell him what Kelly was doing. And she saw us going up to him and got pissed. She walked away from where she was waiting to talk to Tupac. Yes, there were that many chicks up in there all lined up. And she said, somebody paging you. She said, let's just go. And in the car, she called us a bunch of lame virgins. And we didn't care. I said she was a skank for trying to do that. And she wanted me out of her car, but nobody would let her do that either. We never really hung out again after that. Oh, well. I didn't really like her that much anyway. When we met, it was because she said I tried to steal her boyfriend, but I didn't. He came on to me. He was the captain of the basketball team, and I didn't even know he was a basketball player at all. I was just trying to study for my SATs, and that is a whole other story. Prince called me up on stage at the Pontiac Silverdome, and my scary ass didn't go up there. My sisters waited in line for hours so we could get good tickets, and we lucked up on the 8th row and used the light bill money to pay for it. I mean, who needs lights when you got Prince? And the day before the concert, I bought a super tight electric blue column dress from Charlotte Russe at the Lavan Mall. It had a back of the knee high slit. I was 21, and we all screamed when the beautiful one started, and I began to cry even though he didn't play any of the old hits straight. But because everything was spectacular, I didn't sit in my seat the whole time and was losing my voice, and then a burly guy with a headset motioned that I should go with him and come on stage, and what? I froze. I mean, what? I knew that dress did not make me look shy, but I thought if I went up there, I would faint, and I'm not the best dancer. I thought I'd probably cry like an idiot and then pass out and wake up and pass out again. So I said no, shook my head no, my heart beating fast and sweating my dress into a darker blue. All right, last one. Any other name? Khadijah means wife of the prophet. Nothing about my name is casual. Your mouth has to make an effort. You have to commit to all 8 letters, all 3 syllables, no nickname. It means something Uber drivers, the Muslim ones, all men, want to tell me about even after I say yes when they ask, do I know? They want to know how old I am and where I'm from. They want to get in my business. Where's my husband? Some men can't stop telling me who I am or what exactly is so incredible about me or what they had to take or offer without asking. They say it's my fault I am beautiful. I was raised as a Muslim. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, shouldn't I thank God for the kind of beauty that makes me so desirable an object, so in demand by strangers, you might say, my name cursed me to solitude. I don't see any prophets around, do you? If so, pass out my number, tell them I said, what's up, where you been all my life? I know it's a line, but people like familiar things like fellow boring straight people. Hey, I'll be 44 in a few years, and I have a tradition to live up to, a prophecy perhaps, chop chop. I cut off my hair because I wanted to begin again with something on my body no man has touched. I wanted to press rewind. I still want the kind of purity that cures men of acculturated entitlement. I want a little silence when I walk down the street or get into the back seat of a hired car in any city I travel to. Maybe I have to marry myself. Maybe I am my own prophet. I want to stop reacting and keep creating, and to do that, maybe I need a new kind of hijab that makes me safer, unseen, free of both sound and adornment. I could use that kind of safety. Sartre said, hell is other people, and by the token of time through the ages, surely a French philosopher knows whether man equals less than desire, and surely man is in loss except those who do good works and enjoin one another to the truth and enjoin one another to patience and constancy. My mother told me I should keep some things to myself. She should have said keep yourself to yourself, but it was in her nature to be generous. I learned that kind of giving leads to further taking, and it's a light that attracts parasites. What's an ex-Muslim girl to do? Keep praying. The world of prophets is elite. They don't just let anyone in, LOL, not wives. And sometimes I want to cut myself out of all possible institutional pictures. Sometimes I am in a collage I made myself and I have a new name. I have a name I have given myself and I'm the only one who knows what it means. But that doesn't make sense. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Like the first time I was taken for myself, my father asked me what I learned, and that is what I learned. I learned I had no father, but I could walk in the rain and let my hair rise up in the night, become a black halo, Ameen, curling closer to my head as if to love it, softly greeting as if saying, peace be unto me. A man can break you with your own love if you don't remember who you are among the non-believers. All praise is due to the part of me that listens to herself first. The first time I drew a rose, I couldn't stop layering in new petals. My small right hand filled the flimsy newsprint with red Crayola spirals, the lines unbroken, the endless making as sweet as being out of the order other people like to think you are born to. Thank you, guys.
Okay, cool. Wow, okay. Thank you so much to Canem and the New School, first off, for having us both. Thank you, Cyrus and Khadijah, for incredible, incredible poems. I always need a minute after any other name. That poem wrecks me every time. So thank you, Khadijah. I wanted to start with a poem, or I wanted to start with a question for the both of you that I think is kind of threading through your work. Yes. Oh, okay. Yeah, does this work? Okay, cool. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Okay, great. Okay, reset. I wanted to start with a theme that I found was central in both your work and the ways that you're talking about your work, but just the idea of process and ritual. Khadijah, you said in that same Pen 10 interview that you are a writer who wants to always move toward process instead of theory. And Cyrus, I'm thinking about your first book, right, The Mud Actor, and thinking about the ways that you kind of worked through the idea of reincarnation and rebirth and kind of ritual in that way. So I just wanted to kind of have you both speak to the idea of ritual and maybe how it's changed for you as writers throughout the years in your writing processes or otherwise.
Can y'all hear me back there? Yes. So for a long time, I wrote every day. For many years, I would get up early in the morning because I worked a regular job as like an editor for a finance company. I can't make this thing work. Is it on? Yeah. Cool. Oh, okay, my bad. So like a decade, I was doing that. So that's how my first 4 books got written, really. And then my job shifted, and they got rid of a whole department, and so I didn't have any time to write or energy to write. And at the same time, I got sick, and I had to have surgery, like 2 surgeries back to back, and so I was on whatever that medicine they give you, Vicodin.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God. It just messed up your whole brain.
She's a strong
And
one.
so, yeah, it just messed up my daily practice. And so it has evolved more to, like, working in bursts. And I sort of struggle to have enough time to write. But when I have the feeling, I try to obey that feeling. And whatever else I got going on just goes to the wayside. So 5 loads of laundry and no just groceries in the house. Child hungry. Papers need grading. So yeah, I'm kind of in that space right now.
Okay, cool. And you, Cyrus?
I'm actually in the same space. I've written like 30 pages of new poetry. Okay. I went to a monastery, believe it or not. I'm not Catholic, but a friend of mine is a prior of a monastery. And I've actually been working on a novel, my second novel. So I didn't expect to write any poetry at all, and I thought I was going to give myself a break because the book was coming out in February. But from day one, I started writing poetry, and I haven't gone back to fiction. And I feel like I'm excited. I feel like I have the third of a new book. A lot of it's about the monastery. A lot of it's about spiritual quest. But I've never been much of an occasional poet. I think that's one of the things that we have in common. We tend to work in sequences. And for me, the process is always a mystery. Can you hear me, Jacqueline? You're looking like you can't. No. Is it hard to hear, so we just project more? Yes.
Awesome.
Yes. Okay. Hit the back wall. All right.
Diaphragms from now on, y'all.
I've
Thank
never
you.
been an occasional poet, and I have never really had a daily practice. I just haven't been able to write that way. So a lot of the time I don't know what the hell I'm doing, and it usually takes me like 2 or 3 years before I get a sense of what the sequence is. I do seem to prefer to do long structures and sequences. One time I was asked to do an occasional poem. Friends of mine are filmmakers, and it was my birthday, and I went on the beach and I wrote this occasional poem. And that's about the only occasional poem I've ever written. They made it into a little movie. But I'd say that I just have to learn to live with the mystery of figuring out what it is I'm working out through the poems. Does that make sense? So I have to be comfortable with not knowing what's going on. This new group, it's much clearer what the poems are about, but usually I don't exactly know what it is. Like with the Gospel according to Wild Indigo, I got that phrase, I kept thinking, what the hell is that? So I spent like 4 years sort of trying to figure out what it might mean. And I was actually working as an actor. I was doing a play called Yellow Man by Dale Orlando Smith. The role I was born to play, by the way, besides Yul Brynner, The King and I. But seriously, I can't tell you how many times people say, oh, you're make a perfect King and I. So I had to go, it's a 2-actor play, and I needed something. I'd never been to Charleston in the Sea Islands, right? And the play set in the lumber country north of Charleston. So I went to be able to ground myself as an actor. And the production got canceled, a lot of backstage drama. And the poems these poems I read from today started coming out of me slowly. And I thought they were beautiful. And I thought, well, this is some kind of compensation for working so hard in that part and having it not happen. So a lot of times the ritual and the process is kind of a mystery. And I think maybe, I don't know if this is true for you, Khadijah, but by the time the book is actually in print, like hers last year, mine, you start to get a better sense of what it was all about.
Oh, yeah, for sure. This book started as something I just wrote off the cuff, like a top 10 list of celebrities that I met and what I was wearing. And I was doing The Grind, which is a daily poem a day writing group. And I still do it like twice a year. And people wrote back about it. They were like, this is hilarious. Are you going to write more of these? And nobody writes back on those things because everybody's busy. So that was different. I was like, I guess I could keep writing these things. So I just kept writing them, and I read them. And people asked, like, is this going to be a book? So it's kind of like a community book in that way. Because people were interested in them. I felt like I could tell those stories.
By popular demand.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, to hold on to that point, because I think that there's something to be said in your book, Khadijah, about the way that it carries, like, it has a certain, like, emotional freight to it that I think, for me as a reader, like, whenever I read Any Other Name But Myself, I cry immediately, right? And I think that it's because of, and I'm not sure what it is, like maybe it's the syntax, maybe it's the way that, the humor works in the book, but, I think it's a chorus of things, right, that are working together to hold everything the book is trying to hold. And I was just wondering if you could kind of speak to ordering the book and like your experience with, how to kind of put all of these narratives together when so often they seem like the same facet of, or similar facets of a thing.
Yeah, I think just trying to channel that voice of the person that I was experiencing those things was how I accessed that. I don't know, that sounds like woo-woo or weird or whatever, but
it could be woo-woo.
you just sit down, I just sit down and feel the thing that I felt then and write it down. And then in terms of the more clinical ordering, I did have some people look at it and ask what they saw. And one of them was the editor at Yes, she was like, we could use some more of your older voices to like balance it out. So I had some more stuff put in there from recently. I didn't read too many of those. The Tinder dates and whatnot. The rando I met at Barnes & Noble who looked like Lenny Kravitz.
Oh, yeah, that one's bad. Read that one, y'all. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think that I'm really interested in this idea of the chorus because I think it also comes up. I think it comes up one in Black Peculiar, your book, your previous book, and also Cyrus. And there's also a way that the chorus kind of comes in with the subjects that you write about, right? I think that you're constantly talking to ghosts in these books, right? And so I was wondering, if what the kind of connections are with your speakers and kind of a non-corporeal, right, or a non-tangible realm, right? If we're going to stay on the topic of being woo-woo, what does that mean for your books or for you as writers?
Well, I think the concept of channeling is actually super useful for me. I just finished my first novel. It's about the life of a fictional African-American poet. It was a little bit inspired by Langston Hughes and Conte Cullen. And I struggled with it for years because I was trying to represent someone as complex as Langston Hughes, who was really all over the world. And I knew the novel had to be set all over the world. Parts of it are set in the Spanish Civil War. But I tried to do it geographically, and I couldn't get it to move properly. And then when I started cueing into the voice of actually a minor character, then the whole project took off. When I felt like I was bringing the voices of the characters in. And then it became very character driven. So I find that, well, of course with fiction and you're creating character, it's a little bit more obvious when this idea of channeling the person. Less so, I think, in poetry, though. You can try and do that in persona poetry, but I think what we're doing is a lot subtler. What Khadijah does in her play and her verse play is allowing these sort of voices to bubble up inside of you as a writer and to just own them, to pay allegiance to all of them, which is what I loved about her play. It's just bursting at the seams with all these characters and people. And to just realize that all of that is you have access to it, whether you call it collective unconscious or whatever. It's there for you to, I don't know, it's like turning the dial on the radio or something.
Yeah, and letting it come through and not censoring yourself. That was really important with the play because it was really weird. It's like a preheated oven and
the voice of the preheated oven.
Yeah.
You got to read her play. It's wild.
But I was having fun with it, and I was in the middle of this art program. I have half a degree in studio art, master's degree in studio art, and I was the only Black person, and it was just this really oppressive, horrible environment where I didn't feel seen or heard, and I felt it was absurd to me. I would say things and they just say it back to me like I didn't even say it. It was the weirdest thing ever. It was like, get out. So I started writing these characters, and they were just speaking, and I just let them happen the way they wanted to happen, and the weirder the better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, first off, I feel like all of the weird, absurd projects happen in those all-white spaces where you're the only one and you think you're going crazy. So props to that and following that voice. But I want to talk about this idea of channeling and kind of talk about just the direct influences for both of these recent projects, right? Who were you reading? Who were you? Or I guess the better question is, since you're both multi-genre, right? Who were you consuming, right? Were there artists that were heavy on your brain, or just figures that you were thinking about over a long period of time?
I did read, I think I mentioned this in the Penn article, but I did read Alexander Pope, who's this British dude from the 1700s. And he wrote hilarious satire. And I remembered it from undergrad, and I wanted to reread it, and it was really fun.
Was it The Rape of the Lock?
Yes, Rape of the Lock. Yes.
Some crazy
and it
stuff.
was, right?
Yes.
Right? And because it was talking about, this woman that had this lock of hair, and they raped the lock, and she's like, oh God, and they cut it off, and I don't know, it was wild. But it was also about gendered interactions, and I was thinking about how what we're wearing as women and femme-presenting individuals sort of has been told to us we invite certain kinds of violences. And I'm not even gonna say attentions, I'm talking about violences. And so how we survive it through humor, and how we survive it by telling one another, and how we survive it by holding it in for a long time. So I just kind of wanted to present all of that. And I was definitely also reading Toni Morrison.
Yes.
And I think I mentioned that in the book too, Sula.
I fell Sula off this book. It's in my
Yes.
bag right now.
Yeah, I love that book so much.
It's my favorite.
Yeah, and I definitely was reading Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks, and can't think of nobody else right, but like a lot of contemporary poets, and but yeah, a lot of prose. I guess when I was reading this.
I mean, if we can stay on that for a second, because I think I immediately thought of Audre Lorde and Sula specifically with the ways that you're dealing with like memory and the erotic. You know, I think that for what offers so much to the dramatic moments in the book is the fact that, you know, the moments are so mundane, right? Like you're each describing these, you know, these outfits are being described, right? And it's a woman with a public body, right? And there is danger, right? That is the kind of like key thread through all of these poems. And so I'm wondering about the erotic, right? I'm wondering about how you approach the erotic in your work and what you kind of consider in the Audre Lorde sense, if we're staying on that.
I guess I think about it as freedom, like freedom to be how you want to be in your body, even though you have endured certain kinds of violences, or even though other people try to ascribe certain beliefs onto your body, right? They try to tell you who you are just when you walk in the room, right? So trying to define that for yourself and living that despite those impositions.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you. And Cyrus, if I can flip that question to you, but substitute erotic for history. So how do you think history kind of factors into the way that you approach the work as a writer and just a general artist?
Well, as it turns out, I just taught an interdisciplinary course in Toni Morrison.
Oh, perfect.
I started with Sula. So I was thinking about the passage where Sula's grandmother was talking about that little fox fur coat she had.
Yeah.
She's saying, well, it didn't do those little foxes much good. You know, when you're in there. I love Sula, and I would love to make it into a movie. I think it's just begging to be made into a great film. But of course, Toni Morrison. I went back to Robert Hayden. I reviewed his collected poems recently for the Washington Spectator because his history poems are so incredible. So I went back to Robert Hayden. I'm a person, I come from a musical family, so music is always affects me, maybe even more than other works of literature. For the novel, I had to do endless research on the Spanish Civil War, and sort of like the left in the 30s and 40s were so poorly educated in this country about social movement. I mean, that's not true of New York City, but I grew up in California, so I felt like I knew nothing about labor movements and anti-fascist movements in the United States. I didn't know a lot about the McCarthy era, which is something that Langston Hughes and lots of other folks suffered through. So there's just I learned a lot. I also learned a lot about my family. I discovered my great-grandmother was born in the 1870s, and she was the daughter of a white woman and a black man. And her white mother kept her until she was about 7 or 8. And then she was given away to an African-American family. And she was sort of a crazy person from then on.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'd been hearing stories from my mother about that. My mother said no one ever used the C word for my great-grandmother, but it was understood that she was. So I had to imagine what her life was, thinking she was white and then being, transferred to the African-American community in 1878. So that was like one of my projects. I finally talked to my cousins here in New York who are like in their 80s. I said, our family, we're partly Jewish, right? She says, yes. And that's when they told me the story about my great-grandmother, Mary Wambell Williston. And I knew she had that she was very color-struck, that she had all these issues about color. But I didn't understand why. Of course, now I understand why she was that way. So I learned a lot more about my family than I ever expected. We all have family secrets and things in the course of working on the novel. I learned a little bit of Gullah, but I never was in Charleston and the Sea Islands enough to really progress with it. I was going to try and see if I could get it the sequence translated into Gullah, which you might still do. But yeah, there's often a lot of learning. You kind of get your project, and then it's like, okay, it's up to you to try and to make it as authentic as it can be. And sometimes that means you really have to travel, or study, or ask questions, or ask people who know something about what you're focusing on.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Staying on that topic of kind of, I guess, letting go, what do you think the book has most allowed you to release in seeing it in the world and bound?
Release. That's a good question. I don't know. Maybe a little more fear, I guess. Even though I still get the jitters before I read some of the poems, but my attitude more now is fuck it. So that's really fun.
And you, Cyrus?
Well, the book is only out for a couple of weeks. It's 15 years in coming. I wrote the title, what I read for you, like years ago, and then it never wanted to be a whole book. So I kept trying different other sort of song cycles to match it, and it was only in the past few years that I found one that worked. So I think it's still a little new for me to figure out. I feel like it's my most lyrical poetry, if that's possible. My last book was super narrative. My last book was about World War II, about young people in World War II. So that's the thing I think that surprises me most about it, that it came out. Often I think I'm going to write angry, or something's going to come out harsh, and it doesn't come out that way, which often surprises me.
Yeah.
Do you attribute that to the music? Can I ask questions as well?
Yeah, okay. Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you attribute that to the music part of it? Like, is the lyricism the thing that softens it?
I don't know if it softens it. It makes it easier for me to hold it closer to myself.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I don't think this material can actually be softened, really, but you can have a way of absorbed or carry it close to yourself somehow.
Yeah, it makes me think a lot about like Gwendolyn Brooks. I was reading Gay Chaps at the Bar, those sonnets that she has in a street in Bronzeville, and like I think that the music of that like does a lot. I mean, the images are still horrifying, right? In their own ways. There's one poem that I'm thinking about that's talking about like the final pose that a soldier has in death, and just the image is really, really visceral. But I mean, they're all these really ordered, metered sonnets, right? So the music is there and super present. And I think that there's something kind of somatic about that like lulls your body into thinking something else.
Well, I think we have to have a vessel for our sorrow and our rage and our history, which is very harsh, right? And the tools of poetry allow us to, like I said, carry it closer to us without it becoming so unbearable. I feel like I struggle with that a lot these days. There's so much of a sense of outrage every day of the things that are going on here. So trying to find language or something that will, I want to say, steady us in the midst of all this volatility, all this stuff that's going on, all this defilement that goes on every day in this culture right now. And also trusting whatever comes to you. It's not going to be facile. You don't want a soundbite, or what we're doing isn't about proclamation. It's something else.
Yeah.
That's life-saving in some way, but
have you found a need for like additional or other vessels kind of in this moment of volatility? And that's, oh, sorry. Have you found a need for other vessels in this moment, in this kind of, I guess, volatile moment that we're talking about? Whether it's through different genres or, kickboxing, whatever you're trying to do.
I watch TV.
Work.
But yeah, guilty.
No. I binge watch Will and Grace last night. The old Will and Grace.
Yeah, it's fine.
And I couldn't stop laughing because we watched for 3 hours. I couldn't stop laughing.
Oh my God.
Because
awesome.
it's sort of our period. We knew all the jokes and all the allusions, so.
I watch
Television's
Shonda
good.
shows.
Oh yeah, perfect.
Yeah. But also, I have been working I'm in a doctoral program at University of Denver, and there's a Jewish Studies Center, and I've been working for the past year and a half with a Holocaust survivor She is hearing impaired and vision impaired, and she needed somebody to help her finish her memoir. She survived a Ravensbrück concentration camp and Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, so we just finished that. So I've been doing that too, and that's been like really crucial in terms of thinking about clarity, because she's a very powerful, tiny dynamo of a speaker, and clarity is like the thing that drives her storytelling, and it's sort of rubbed off on me lately.
Yeah, awesome. Wow. Yeah. Also, just thinking about that idea of memoir, can we just go back real quick to your aversion to calling this project a memoir, and like what your thought process was behind that?
It just didn't feel right.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
It just didn't feel right calling it a memoir. It's not long enough, and the shape of it didn't feel like it. And also, I didn't want people trying to like, did this really happen? Like they do with memoir, whereas you sort of accept the truth of it if it's something else. So and also I just like existing in spaces that can't be easily defined. So that was fun to me. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, the reason that I ask is because I think one of the first things that it made me think of was like in the early aughts, I think I grew up during like the tale of like the Video Vixen or like the tell-all memoir, right? Like the Corinne Steffens, right? Like that was when I was a kid, right? So, you know, thinking about, you know, the kind of drop in the ocean that was for like my like 10, 11-year-old world, you know, and just thinking about what kind of power, right, like she wielded as a subject. And I think it's a kind of power that like your speaker's aware of. And I'm just really interested in, well, I guess to flip this into a question, right, like have the ways that you have experienced or seen power changed in the making of and seeing this book in the world?
No, still pretty jacked up. Yeah. And so I think the only difference maybe today would be that women are speaking up more. And if I'm presenting, people are speaking up more and being listened to a little bit more just because of, you know, the visibility of things. And but it's still happening. Like I just heard another story. Like people, that's one thing about writing this book is people tell me stuff that happened to them, whether it's in the literary community or elsewhere. And so I just heard a story this afternoon in my cab on the way to hotel. So it's still happening. There has to be a fundamental cultural shift. And this little tiny book ain't gonna do it, but maybe it'll draw attention in some way.
Absolutely. Thinking about kind of shifting topics here, thinking about this idea of icons and iconography. Cyrus, I'm really drawn to the religious imagery in your book. I think I did 15 years of Catholic school, so you know it's all over the place for me. So like use of the words like sacramental, kind of like it, you know, embedding itself in your diction. And I'm wondering if you can speak to the idea of the sacred in your work and kind of where that comes from.
Well, I've been plunged into it more deeply because of the monastery visit for 2 weeks. I was incommunicado for the first time in my life. I had no internet, no phone. And then all this language came out of me. So right now I'm really exploring, I mean, this is the main focus of this new book, you know, what the sacred means to me, and just kind of exploring the language. I'm not Catholic, but they're pretty hardcore Catholics at this Benedictine monastery. So essentially I was like praying with him every 2 hours or so and learning a little bit of the Latin and understanding that. So I'm just exploring it further. I was raised Episcopal, which some people think is Catholic light, so I come from Episcopal family. My grandfather's Episcopal deacon, like the poem I read. So I think a lot of my work has always been about spiritual quest, more than anything, really. And I'm not sure I consider myself a Christian anymore, or what I consider myself as. But I found when I was in the monastery, I realized that I'm one of these people who's never doubted the existence of a creator. I just have never had any doubt ever. So I don't really understand agnosticism or atheism. I just don't. And that actually connects me more to people of, quote, faith than other people. I realized I had more in common with Christians than I realized. Of course, evangelical Christians are getting quite a bad name these days for being catch-as-catch-can about their spirituality. But so I'm going deeper into it. I was just at the cathedral yesterday, and I'm staying at Columbia. Jean Toomer is now in the Poets' Corner, so to go and pay my homage to Jean Toomer. But I feel like I'm learning again. It's like, okay, how much do I want to delve into the actual liturgical language? I borrowed some things from the monks when I was there. So I'm interested in that life of quest. I think of myself as being a very worldly person, so it's interesting to go into that space of monasticism and see what silence can give me. And it turns out a lot of language, a lot of things happened to me out in the desert. I became a film critic again after 20-some years. I stopped being a film critic when I became an actor. I'm starting an acting company. I've written 30 pages of poetry. I guess sometimes just having the silence and the space, something like a sacred space, it's there in the desert in Abiquiu where George O'Keeffe lived, just allowed all of this stuff to come through me there. So yeah, words like sacramental and, I'm starting to enjoy the Latin a little bit. I'm a person who's super sensitive to Hebrew, so I would like at some point, maybe when I retire, to learn in a secular fashion, because I think I'm mostly interested in the Kabbalah. I don't need to convert to Judaism, but I'm, partially Jewish, and just the two languages I vibrate most to are French and Hebrew, I've discovered over the years. So I just want to go down that path to see what learning Hebrew would do for me, right? So I think it's just a matter of being a curious person all the time, being awake, and then pushing past people's projections about how that's supposed to look, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. I think there is time for one more question. I think we're going to open it up to the audience.
Yeah.
So in thinking about both of you are far away from your first book, kind of like far removed from the first book and the anxiety and pressures of all of that. I think sitting in a space, right, sitting in an MFA program, right, I think the anxieties around the first book are like palpable for a lot of people. And I guess my question is, if you had a word of advice to offer to, as being teachers, right, in both MFA programs, to either a student, right, or your younger self in moving towards the first book, what would you kind of offer? What would be the advice? Or is there a piece of advice that you do offer already?
In terms of writing it or publishing it, or?
In terms of writing it, in terms of writing it and publishing it, in terms of the process of building it from A to Z, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sometimes your first book is not going to be your first book.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a whole book before my first book.
Yes.
And then it just exploded into other things. So, but then the first book that was published came out as like this more cohesive piece. So like being aware that you're going to write more, and that the first book is not this big behemoth of a thing. It's not like, it is a hurdle, but if you think about it differently as like a collection of poems that you're writing that is going to become a book, and that you're going to write another one, and that you're going to write another one, it kind of lessens the weight of it. Like as soon as you finish it, like having other things in mind that you want to investigate, to go back to what Cyrus is saying, like the things that you're curious about or obsessed with, like having a vision forward beyond just the one book will release you from some of the expectations that can weigh you down with the first book.
Yeah.
My situation was so freakish that I don't even know. I think I'm the youngest winner ever of the National I was 23 years old. It was the year after college. I was just writing. I didn't consider myself a poet or even a writer. Then Al Young called me and said, I'm judging this contest. I hear you're working on a book. He said, and I said, do you have one? I said, no, it's not done. He said, well, can you get it done in 3 months? I said, I guess so. So I delivered it to him, and then a couple months later he said, I've chosen your book for this as the winner of the prize. And he said, you don't know what you're getting into yet. So I had to grow into being a poet, into thinking of myself as a poet. I had writer's block for a couple of years. So I guess part of what I want to say is you don't have to think of yourself as a poet with a capital P or a writer with a capital W to go on this journey of writing and expressing yourself. I mean, I was trained to be an actor and a filmmaker. I wasn't trained to be in this field. So that's when I say it was freakish, because it was like Al Young, saying, "Oh, I think you're a poet." It was like the Cinderella experience. Like, oh, okay, if he thinks so, and
Yeah, maybe the
so
shoe fit.
so it's kind of hard. But I think just this idea that you don't have to be a poet with a capital P to write a book, and that it's a process, and trial and error, and hopefully you're just going to keep writing and move into a life that allows you some time and supports your writing, and you have people around you who will do that for you, who will respect you, people who are your close readers, and people who will just say, "Oh, Khadijah needs to do that," or Cyrus needs to do that, because it's a struggle to get, especially when you're a young person, it's a struggle to get to the writing, because the practical demands are so great. They don't allow for much interior life, do they?
No, they don't.
I got hip to that pretty fast.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you're not going to have an interior life. You're just going to do your work, and on the weekend do your laundry, and then go back to work, right? So, anyway.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. I think we are going to open this up for questions. Which?
Do you need extra mic?
Yeah.
Okay, you can come up.
Okay, cool. Yes.
Hey. Oh, good. This is great.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for sharing your work, Khadijah and Cyrus. I just had a question for, I think, both of you. I wonder, Khadijah, if you could talk about your perception of poetry and writing itself as a form of sustenance, and just like generally about that. And then I just had one quick question for Cyrus. If you in the reading of the poems you shared tonight and in the last book, how do you feel the poems reflect a sense of the presence, present rather, as it reflects the past, as they sort of written in that? That one. Thank you.
Well, I didn't read the poems that were set in the present from that sequence. For some reason, when I thought about what I wanted to share, I felt like I wanted to share slave voices. So in the present, it's the speaker and Augustus and Costa and his father, and they're going through the whole drama of the father rejecting the gay son and the gay son's partner. So there's that drama going on. But I also wanted to, I'm often writing about the traumas of the past and feeling like, we're not done with the things that happened in the past, and that actually being in those places, we can still feel the trauma to the people and also to the place itself. So I think that my poetry is trying to create some kind of healing of the past that way. And in the situation with Augustus and the speaker and the father, it's like they're locked into this, drama of homophobia, but it's also connected to the survival of their Gullah culture as a group, and how that becomes a source of integrity for them in the face of the confusion and anger and phobia stuff. It is a real sequence that has a dramatic arc, but I only shared a portion of it. It's not quite like anything else I've ever written. It has characters and is lyrical, but it's also, very rooted in the voices of the slaves that come in. And as a kind of chorus there, if that answers you or helps you that way, okay? Sure.
Your question was about poetry as sustenance, right? So I think about the reading of poetry more as sustenance than writing. Writing feels more like releasing or creating, and I don't know. I haven't thought of it in those particular terms, but I have definitely thought of reading in that way, especially when I'm not writing, because it's like you're feeling the well, and also like, figuring out how other people do stuff. And it's exciting to read really good poems to me, and that is very life-giving. Yeah.
My check. I don't know how to ask the question, but I'm asking anyway. I'm thinking through how space and place informs language and tone and form and all that. And as I'm listening to y'all work, I'm hearing, much as I'm getting caught up in the scenes and the story, I'm getting caught up in the place too. I'm thinking about what it's like being there, Mm-hmm. And I'm having this question a lot, being new to New York City from Chicago. And, I have to leave New York soon and go to another, Canada to do some writing. And so I'm thinking a lot through how places is seeping through work. And so I'm wondering like how you just thought through space and place as as you was writing, but then also like, is there any particular thing you want to say about that you tried to say about the space through your work, and how has the place evolved in your eyes, or has it evolved in your eyes as you was writing your work? I'm just thinking through these kind of things.
Yeah, for LA, LA is being gentrified right now, especially where I grew up. So part of the impulse to write some of these is to capture what it felt like, in the 80s and 90s. Like some of those areas were like really kind of scary. And now I see people in their shorts and man buns walking their dogs, and it trips me out. So just like listening to the memories of that place and seeing it being like reinscribed, and also like how people have changed in relation to place, how I've changed in relation to place, and like what memory means when a place is totally different in the present. So that's, in this particular book, what I was thinking about.
There are a lot of descriptions of South Carolina in the sequence. And my mom's from North Carolina. So South Carolina was like a new landscape for me. And the marshes and the islands, I fell in love with them in some way, and I wanted to replicate that in the poems. So the visual dimension of it was really, really important to me as much as the music, because it felt like it's such a... Well, one of the things that we know about Gullah culture is that the rice and indigo slaves were the most independent slaves of all. They were left to their own devices during what they called the malarial months, where the masters left them alone on the plantation to manage and or die of malaria. So it's a distinctive culture. Some of it's come down through Porgy and Bess and things like that. But a lot of things you have to do like in situ, as in you have to be at the site to write it down and understand the nature of the place. Like we were talking about, my last book had a lot to do with the Holocaust, and she's working with this Holocaust survivor. So I went to Dachau, and the fields around Dachau are absolutely beautiful. It feels inconceivable that camp could be there. And when you experience that, you realize that was deliberate. Like, no one would have believed this camp existed there because of the beauty of the surrounding. I remember when I was a student in Florence, going to the synagogue, which is maybe the biggest one in Europe. They use it the Nazis use it as a parking garage for their tanks. But again, Florence is so beautiful, it doesn't seem like Nazis could ever exist there, that they would like be irradiated on contact or something. So sometimes you just have to be in that place to understand how these things could happen and how people could claim that they didn't know anything. Mm-hmm. It would be easy not to know or pretend. Even Munich is so beautiful. It's like, how did Mein Kampf get written here? And how do these things happen here in this place that seems, particularly beautiful aesthetically or whatever? So sometimes it's very, very important to actually be physically in the place. It's not enough to do intellectual research. Mm-hmm. You have to go to that place. So that's an option. It can get expensive. it can wreck your travel budget. But sometimes if you want to be authentic with what you're doing, you have to pay for that ticket to Dachau or whatever, Okay.
Yeah. I think Lucille Clifton said, write what you are curious about too. So like if you are on a budget and you can't go, like to just do like super extra research. Mm-hmm. So my first book, I definitely didn't go to Palenque or any of the ruins in Mexico. But I had done a lot of research, and at the time I could speak Spanish. Now I just understand it. I like lost most of it, but You can also write what you're curious about, but I do always like wonder what kind of poems I could have written had I been able to like leave my son and like spend that kind of money to go sit in that space.
We have time for one more question.
So I just wanted to go back to earlier. You were mentioning reading poetry versus writing poetry. And I personally feel like, there's really nothing new under the sun. We're inspired by everything. But I wanted to get you guys' opinion on how, is it important, do you feel personally in your opinion, is it important to read a lot of poetry
Yes.
as a poet?
Holy crap!
Yes.
And I'm always inspired by new work. I just
Okay.
read Tommy Pico's book. Love that book so much. It made me like excited to write, and I hadn't written in a long time. And it's called
Tommy Pico.
Tommy Pico.
Which one? Nature Poem?
He just won a Whiting Award, maybe?
Yeah, Nature
The first
Poem.
book is called IRL. The second book is called Nature Poem. The third book is Junk.
Junk, right? I read IRL first, but that was the one that we were looking at for the Kingsley and Cake Tufts that I was trying to like make it win, but I don't know. I feel like poetry can have futuristic elements in that sometimes people don't quite understand it yet, and I'm interested in people who are doing things that maybe, like you said, I haven't quite seen in that way yet. If he's writing an epic poem from the perspective of a Kumiye individual using A.R. Ammons as an inspiration in the text message format, I'm gonna think that hell yes. So there are a lot of the poets that I really love. In Donica's book that won, these little tiny lyric, prose-ish
Bestiary
pieces,
book?
so beautiful, yeah. So yes, I'll read it all, even if it's bad. There's gonna be, you're gonna come across something amazing, and it's worth reading everything you possibly can. I tell my students when I first started, I went to the bookstore and started with A, and I read everything in the bookstore. When I was done with the bookstore, I went to the library and I started with A. So I read everything. Yes.
And so with that being said, how do you keep your own voice? How do you still manage to, because you both have totally different voices and like your work is both phenomenal. How do you stay true to your own voice and your own originality in your work while, still being immersed in different writers and poetry? Basically, how do you not become just like a copycat? I hate to sound
Because I
immature,
know who
but
I am. Do you want to go with that?
I think sometimes you have to pull away from, sometimes you're so sensitive, the other voices are too much. But I think, as professors, and we've both been judges this year. I'm the chair of the LA Times Book Prize for poetry this year. So I read a lot of books, and I know Khadijah read a lot of books. And I'm always advising my students at every level to read, because one of the things I think is so important is that you can find your allies, you can find
absolutely.
people who are on a similar path. And when that happens, you're so bolstered by that sense that you're not alone with your your strategies as a writer and everything. That's like maybe the best part of it. But also, I think for me, as a poet who's had, I guess, 6 books now, I want to keep current. I want to know what's happening out there. And there's just such exciting work. Like Evie Shockley's book, Semi-Automatic, is incredible. I don't know if you've read that one yet. Oh, it's just amazing. There's just brilliant work being done, and it's good to be reminded there. And sometimes it's a little intimidating, like, oh, or you find a poet you wish you could write like that, but you'll never be able to write like that. But you're glad that they're doing it for you, right? So I'm really intense with my reading. I'm doing a graduate workshop. We just did Olio, Tayema's book. We did Ann Carson's Float. Sam Sachs came to visit us. Tracy Brimhall is going to read from her Saudade, which is wildly erotic and crazy. So I'm always the only reason I bring books into my workshop is to push the envelope. Mm-hmm. Like they just read Ann Carson, it's like 22 chapbooks. They always have to struggle with the structure to figure out, is this really a poetry book? What is this? That's what I love to do in the workshop. There's no other reason for me to bring extra books in the workshop unless it's going to like fry their brains somehow. So starting with Olio was like, they love it now if they have to wrestle with it.
Yeah.
And I so much believe in experimental work. It's one of the things I love about Khadijah. I had the pleasure of reading Khadijah's books this week about her play. It just makes you, I think Gertrude's trying to be proud of your play. It's really ambitious and wild, and we always have to have our explorers and experimenters, doing what they need to do to push what's possible there. So that's another reason to read, just to get into the explorational aspect of our field. And there's some wild folks out there.
Yes.
They really are.
And Norbessa Phillip.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I feel like you could do whatever you want. Like, and if you know that that's what you want to do, you're in it for the act of writing and making, other people are just going to influence you in a positive way if you take what feels right. And because we all like absorb one another's work, like definitely, and just discard the rest, just like a workshop. So
you get to be the final arbiter, right?
Yes.
Of your own voice.
Yes.
But you sure can, shop around and look around and do all that. It's like,
and that's nothing wrong with copying when you're first starting. When you're first starting, that's kind of just what you do. You like try to write sonnets like Shakespeare, or write puzzles like Aga Shahid Ali. That's just
it's like the art students in the museum. They get out their pad and they're like copying.
That's right.
That's okay too. Yeah. Right.
Don't be scared.
Don't be scared. Yeah.
That's a good note to end on.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you for coming.